Hello guys, and welcome to a new Steel Division 2 video today by me, Vulcan. Today I have for you the Battlegroup preview for the 9th Guards Cavalry Division. Please remember, everything you are about to see is still in beta and therefore subject to change. I've set up this Battlegroup as a Vanguard deployment type with the intention of taking as much ground as I can in Phase A, because the 9th Guards doesn't seem to have much staying power moving into Phase B or C due to their lack of heavy tanks. Moving into the Recon tab, the first card that I have is the T-34-76 Razvedka. It's a standard T-34 with the similar penetration of 100mm and 75mm of frontal armour. It's very fast with the 40 km/h speed off-road for a tank that's really good. So use these to accompany your tank pushes in the early game, which are going to be really aggressive, and it should stop you from being ambushed so much, and also give you more opportunities to flank heavy tanks with its fast speed. Next card I have is the Osnaz Sniperi. I'm not a massive fan of sniper squads, but I wanted to try these guys out. I tend to find that they get revealed at range and then just absolutely obliterated by tanks, so that sucks, but if you manage to keep them out of the way of tanks, they can certainly start to carve up infantry, so that's what I've been trying to use them for. Then I have a card of the T-70 Razvedka. Since the T-70s are now available, I wanted to try them out. I think they're a bit too expensive for what they offer, but in general, nippy little tanks that can provide that recon capability for your other medium tanks in Phase B. Then other choices in the Recon tab include the Dozor squads, the 2-man recon, pretty standard. They can be brought in with the B-20 and the M3A1 Razvedka, so you can get recon vehicles with these. And honestly, in the long term, I'd probably end up switching out some of these tanks in order to just have these 2-man recon squads, because they do provide decent information. Then there is the Ford GPA-MG. This is the US vehicle, amphibious vehicle, but it has a Maxim machine gun mounted on it, which it looks really funny. But awesome little vehicle, not really that practical though in the grand scheme of things. Then there is the Kaz Razvedka. These are actually pretty strong at close range. They have 8 submachine guns, so I can imagine them melting enemy infantry squads that either don't have flamethrowers or HE grenades. But for their cost, I think they're a bit too expensive, although you can bring them in with the M3A1 Razvedka again, which will provide you with a 50 cal vehicle and that recon capability. Finally, there is the Valentine 3. Very slow vehicle, 16 km/h speed off-road and 25 km/h speed on-road, so this isn't really getting anywhere fast. Its firepower is very limited with its 75mm of penetration, and its basic machine gun isn't really enough to be an infantry support role, so this tank does struggle a little bit to be effective and worth bringing in at all. But still there if you want to try it out. Next up we have the infantry tab, and the first card that I'm bringing in is the Saperi. These guys have the 4 submachine guns, the HE grenades and the Panzerfaust, and are fantastic because you can bring them in with a jeep, which allows you to get them to the front line very quickly indeed. That 105 km/h on-road speed does allow you to get them into those ambushing positions, and that can really catch out your opponent. Next card I have is the Kazaki. These guys have 3 submachine guns, 4 rifles, the DP and the PTRD, and are an all-round really good squad for not only dealing with infantry at range and at close range, but also the PTRD allows them to take on those light vehicles for you in the early game. So having a card of these in Phase A is pretty important, and they are relatively cheap for what they offer at 20 points a piece. Then I have a card of the Osnaz. These are a 4-man squad which do have a bazooka, so keep them on return fire and use them to ambush, and you'll be in a really good spot with these. And that's basically what they're there for, to provide that little bit extra lethality when it comes to AT around your infantry. Next up I have a card of the Kaz Komroti. These are a 6-man squad with SVTs and smoke grenades, provide that command around your units, and you can get 4 of them on a card in Phase A, which is really nice. In Phase B I've got more Kazaki, bringing these guys in with the 1-star veterancy though, just because I found that with the 9th Guards you don't get through all of your infantry, and if you do, then you're probably already lost. So making sure that you have that little bit extra quality on these works out nicely and allows them to be a bit more successful with the PTRD for sure. Also in Phase B, I have another card of the Osnaz, and then I have a card of the Osnaz Komrotti, which are a 4-man squad with submachine guns and smoke grenades. So really nice because they don't reveal themselves at past 100 meter range, and they have the smoke grenades for that utility as well. Finally, in Phase C, I have more Kazaki if I need them. 18 men with the 1-star veterancy once again. Other choices in the 9th Guards Infantry tab include the Kazaki with SVTs. These are a decent medium range unit with the 500 meter range on the SVT. Can do quite a lot of damage, but the best thing about these Kazaki squads is this chap in the middle with his epic beard. That's certainly the case. But 11 strength, yeah, decent mid-range squad. Then you have the Kazaki with the PPSH. These guys are 8-men squads. Really good at taking on any infantry that doesn't have flamethrowers or HE grenades. Will wipe out things like Panzer Grenadiers at close range. RPG 43, decent for taking out any armoured vehicles that get close enough, but 60 meter range really lets it down, and I think that's why AT grenades are much worse in this game than they were in Steel Division Normandy 44. There's also the Osnaz Saperi. These guys have 4 submachine guns and HE grenades. I much prefer the standard Osnaz squads because they do come with the bazooka. Then there's the Saperi. These are your standard infantry squads with HE grenades, and the Saperi Komrotti, which is okay, but they don't have any smoke grenades, and the SVTs will reveal themselves at range, so not the most reliable command squad in the world. So now on to the tank tab of the 9th Guards, and I think this is really the tab that defines how the 9th Guard is played. Because you don't have any access to heavy tanks and you're reliant mainly on medium tanks, it does mean that you have to push for an early game build, in my opinion. So to begin with, I have the Command T70s, and these are 10 points cheaper than the Recon variant whilst providing command, so they're actually much more worth it than the T70s in the Recon tab. And they also provide decent firepower, so supplement your T34s and Shermans really well. Then I have a card of the T34s in Phase A. You can bring these in at Phase B for more availability. It would give you 16 on a card in Phase B if you had no veterancy on the tanks. But I really like having them in Phase A as they allow you to overrun the heavier tanks quite well. Because they're so fast and they have a decent amount of penetration, finding side shots with these into heavy tanks is not impossible. And I've killed Tigers with T-34-76s multiple times, so that's what they're there for. To provide more of an infantry role and a bit more tankiness, I have 2 cards of the Shermans in Phase A. This gives me 12 of them available. And these have 100mm of frontal armor, which is really good for bouncing those early game AT guns that can be quite a nuisance, and it also means you don't have to worry about like light AT weapons as much. Then you have 90mm of penetration on its main gun, which is still decent enough to get through the side armor of heavy tanks, as well as kill off most light and medium vehicles. It has the HE power, which is okay. But furthermore to that, it has a 50 cal and a 30 cal, so both of those combined make these tanks actually really decent at killing infantry. And providing infantry support is the main reason you're going to be using these, whilst your T-34-76s really go on the hunt for those heavier tanks. In Phase B, I've got another card of the Shermans, and then I've also got a card of the Command Shermans to come along with them. There is also the choice of the Valentine 9. This thing has 115mm of penetration, but not a massive fan since it does have such a slow speed. It has nothing as well that it can use to fire at infantry. No machine gun, no HE rounds on its main gun. So very, very specialized unit, and I think only against certain divisions will the Valentine 9 ever really be used. Next up, the support tab, and the first card that I'm bringing in is the Ognemachiki, which are the 2-man flamethrower squads. These are great for supplementing your own infantry, and to make sure that I have as many as possible, I'm bringing them in with no veterancy. They also have the utility of that smoke grenade, so that can also be helpful if you have a squad of them near like an AT gun or something. You can smoke off the AT gun if it comes under fire. But one thing I will say is don't bring them in with the ZIS 42. That's how they're automatically set up to be brought in, and you can see I fell for it in this particular battle group. I definitely recommend bringing them in the Jeep because it is the fastest vehicle that you can get them in, and therefore they can get to ambushing positions, and they do work very well from entrenched positions like trenches or buildings. So if you can get them to those positions quickly, that will work out quite nicely. Next up, I have the Studebaker. This is your standard supply, bringing it in phase A to fix criticals and also provide supply for my artillery. Then I have the combat, which is your standard commander squad, which buffs your other leaders, which are within 1,500 meter range. And I've got another card of the Studebaker to provide more supply for my artillery. And in phase B, the commander again, the M3A1 combat. Other choices in the support tab include the Kaz Maxim, which is your standard Maxim machine gun with the 1,000 meter range. There's the Ford GPA, which is a supply vehicle. These are cheaper than the Studebaker, but you get 5,000 less supply. So I'm not a massive fan of these. I think the Studebaker just does the job much better. Then there's the OB 2576mm, which is your infantry gun. It does have some heat shells that can fire at armor with the 90mm of penetration, but the HE is really where it's at, and that's what you're going to want to use it for. Then finally, there's the choice to bring in the Phase C BA-20V Combat, but if you need more than 2 commanders, then you're probably doing something wrong. Now we have the AT tab of the 9th Guards, and it's very small. There's not many cards to choose from, and you don't have many slots available. So all I've got is 6 of the 45mm AT guns in Phase A. They come in at 1-star veterancy, which is actually pretty nice, and it's decent availability for what they are. 100mm of penetration, more than enough to kill off light and medium tanks, so that's what they're there for. Get them into ambushing positions, and they'll side shot heavy tanks as well. Just bear in mind they only have 95mm of penetration on their standard AP shells. Then in Phase B, I have a card of the ZIS 2. These are for killing those heavier tanks. They do have the 185mm of penetration on their APCR shells, but they only have 6 of them, so be sparing whilst using them. Their standard AP shells only have 120mm of penetration, so yeah, be careful with these, because you can get caught out thinking that you can penetrate more than you actually can, especially if all of the APCR shells have been used up. But otherwise really good for ambushing these. Other choices in the AT tab include the Kaz PTRS-41, which is just your standard 2-man PTRS squad. Not a real fan of them for their price, so don't really find a way into my battle group. Then there is also the option to bring in the ZIS 3s, and these are your indirect fire AT guns. They can fire directly with the APCR shells with 135mm penetration, but their standard AP shells are only 105mm of penetration. Then they have the HE shells, which have that unlimited indirect fire range. I'm just not a fan of these at all. I always tend to rely on the ZIS 2, which is more specialised as an AT gun. Moving on to the anti-air tab of the 9th Guards. The first card that I've chosen is the Zenart 37mm AA, and these are your standard AA that I bring in with most of the Soviet divisions alongside the Dushka truck, which can also fire at aircraft, so useful combination, and it's only 10 points more to bring them in with the Dushka truck, so more than worth it in my opinion. Moving into Phase B, I have a card of the 94M ZIS 12, which is a 72k autocannon on the back of a truck, and this thing is pretty cool. It's very similar in firepower to the SDKFZ 71 on the German side of things. So can do quite well at shooting down enemy aircraft and does have a decent amount of lethality. You can only get 2 on a card, but at 80 points, not too bad. Then in Phase C, I have 4 more of those on another card. Other choices in the anti-air tab include the Dushka trucks on their own, and also the Zenart 85mm, which is very similar to an 88. It has APCR shells with 180mm of penetration. It's got AP shells with 145mm of penetration. It's got its standard HE shells and its anti-air rounds. So pretty awesome gun, honestly. But I find that any guns like this tend to get focused quite hard by artillery. So not ideal. Also, their transport's really slow at the 23 km/h off-road speed, so they don't really get into position that quickly, even if that tractor does look pretty damn awesome. So there you go, that's the anti-air. So now we have the artillery tab, and it's honestly not anything special in the 9th Guards, but let's go through the cards anyway. First of all, I have the motorbike jeeps. These have the 82mm mortar strapped on the back. The great thing about them is they can reposition very quickly after firing, so you shouldn't really be hit by counter battery all that much. They have limited range, but good for pinning down infantry for sure, and nice to have around in the early game. Also for that smoke capability as well. Also in Phase A, I have the Katyusha. Now you can bring these in later phases for more availability, but I think it's important to have the Katyusha in Phase A so that you can pin hard targets, things like tigers, panthers, anything that's really difficult to deal with early on with medium tanks. You can pin and then rush down with the tanks afterwards, rather than trying to fight a tiger head on. Just make sure that you have forced it to fall back with the Katyusha first. Other great thing about the Katyusha is it can just like annihilate light armored vehicles and also things like AT guns. So in a pinch, you can use it for that purpose. Then in Phase B, I have a card of the 120mm mortars. These have the 6,000 meter range, so don't have to have them so close to the front line. And they also have a serious amount of damage, so can be very effective. And when they hit the mark, they can do a lot of damage and help you pin down tanks and so on. Other choices in the artillery tab include the artillerists, but since I'm using mostly mortars, there isn't much use for radios. Then there is the VZVOD UPR. These are your 10 strength command squads that you can get quite a decent amount of, but since I bring in most of my command with infantry and tanks, I don't find that I need to spend more points in the artillery tab to get them. Then there's the standard 82mm mortar with infantry, and then we have the F22, which is your howitzer, unlimited range. Wouldn't use it for the AP shells, even though it does have the 105mm penetration. It's only got 30% accuracy. It's more for the HE, but the damage is really lacking. Then there's a card of the Su-76Ms, and whilst these are okay, I think they're quite expensive for what they offer, so I'm happy with my other choices. Now we have the air tab, and there's a couple new units in the air tab for this division, so that's really cool. First of all though, the card that I have is the Lag 3 Series 3-4 in Phase A. These are your 2-star veterancy fighters that you can get 3 of on a card. Very, very nice for controlling the sky in the early game. They do have a 20mm in the nose, as well as a bunch of machine guns, so relatively decent firepower and will carry you through that early game. Also in Phase A, I do have the LA7s with the 50kg bombs. Those 50kg bombs are only really useful for pinning down things like AT guns and infantry. They won't do much to tanks, so don't try and use them to pin down those. They also still have the 580 km/h speed, so can be decent fighters, a little bit of a multi-role fighter bomber for you. Also in Phase A, the TU-2S, which has 9 100kg bombs. Great carpet bomber for really helping you pin those tougher units, and then you run them down with the medium tank. So similar to the use of the Katyusha in Phase A, the TU-2S is another option for you to have in that early game to help you break through those harder units. So that's what it's there for. In Phase B, I have a card of the LA7s just as fighters without any ordnance. They have 645 km/h speed. Actually pretty decent. Originally, when looking at the stat cards for the LA7, I was disappointed with the fact they only have 2 damage overall, but having seen them in practice, they are actually pretty damn decent, so definitely worth having a card of them in my opinion. Then in Phase B, I also have more of the TU2S carpet bombers to provide more breakthrough capability. Other choices in the air tab include the PO2 recon aircraft. Unfortunately, because it doesn't have much substance and you can't get that many of them on a card, I don't really find I want to waste activation points on bringing them in. That's the biggest problem with these recon aircraft. Then there's the Lag 3 Series 3-4 with 82mm rockets. These rockets have limited effectiveness, only really good for maybe pinning infantry, and that's at a stretch. Then there's the Lag 3 Series 3-4. Haven't had much of a chance to try these out, but it seems they have AP rockets. Their effectiveness, I'm not entirely sure, so take these at your own risk and maybe have a go with them. I'll probably do so myself at some point. Then there's the LA7 available with 100 kilogram bombs instead of 50 kilogram bombs, but you can only get one of them in Phase A, which is why I have the LA7s with the 50 kilogram bombs instead. And then there's also a TU2S that you can bring in with a 1000 kilogram bomb, which is really good for just like pinning large areas of units, but I think I prefer the cluster bombers in this case just because they're that little bit cheaper, and when your income's dropped off in Phase B with the Vanguard deployment, 30 points does make quite a bit of a difference. So that's it, that's the air tab. Finally, we have the defense tab, and I've set this up pretty much as I always do, with 1 card of the barbed wire to start, then 2 cards of the bunker maxims, a card of the trenches, and 2 cards of the AT 45mm bunkers. I don't really see much use for the PTRDs, but there's always reason to maybe bring in at least a card of gun pits so that you can embed things like AA units or even mortars in the breakthrough game mode, so something worth considering anyway. And that's about it for the 9th Guards. You can see that it is definitely weighted towards Phase A, with things like the bombers and Katyushas really supplementing a breakthrough by pinning down the heavier units and then allowing things like the T-34s, which are your fast tanks, to really push forwards hard and flank enemy hard targets. So that's what you want to be doing, really hitting the enemy hard as much as you can in Phase A, because as soon as you get to Phase B, you're going to be falling off, and it's probably the worst thing about this division. It is a B tier division, so it does definitely have a lot of weaknesses, but if you can get that Phase A down and really perfect that playstyle, then you may have some success with this division. But that's it from me. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed my look at the 9th Guards. Apologies that these videos did come a little bit late on Beta Phase 4, but I couldn't really help that because I was away. In the meantime though, thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.